Hi, my name's Dustin, and I did my Capstone project on increasing compliance rates for UST safety on tribal lands. I did my project with the EPA Region 10. To start, underground storage tanks are containers holding hazardous materials underground. Most often, it's substances like petroleum. And if they're not properly kept, they can end up leaking and resulting in groundwater contamination. Because of this, UST regulations were updated in 2018 to hopefully increase safety, but the compliance rates ended up dropping and the average days until compliance increased after this. And that's shown in figure one, where in fiscal years 2017 and 2018, it took about 100 days for tank facilities to come into compliance. But after those regulations took place, that number of days jumped up to almost 300. In 2020, it dropped back down a bit, but there were a lot less inspections, so that sample size was a lot smaller. And part of this could be because of the lack of access to environmental risk information. And that, I believe, could be an environmental justice issue. And because of that, different methods of outreach can be more effective for different situations, and effectively communicating underground storage tank safety regulations is a huge necessity. And so the research question that I focused on was, what are the best outreach practices that the US EPA can use in order to communicate environmental risk and safety guidelines to tribal communities? So for my internship, I worked with the EPA Region 10 underground storage tank team, and we developed outreach materials to inform tank facility owners of the new tank regulations. And on top of this, I compiled and evaluated a bunch of sources related to subjects that all fell under this topic. And those subjects were environmental risks of underground storage tanks, environmental justice, US government and tribal relations, and what makes outreach successful in general. So my main finding was that having easy to digest information is extremely effective in getting the target audience to understand what information is trying to be communicated. And the more they understand it, the more likely it is that they'll put it into practice, which is very important for safety regulations. And we also found that having multiple avenues of media makes information a lot more readily available and just easier to access in general. So we created a physical version and a web version of our compliance assistance materials to make sure that it could reach everybody that needs to see it. And figure two shows the front page of a trifold brochure that we developed that contains a lot of information about how tank facility owners can prepare for tank inspections and make sure that they're in compliance when that time comes around. And this brochure was mailed to the owners of tank facilities on tribal lands in Region 10, as well as tribal environmental departments in Region 10. And figure three shows a web version of that brochure, essentially. It has the same information, but it's in a more web-friendly format, and it didn't have to be mailed to anybody. So anybody that wants to see it can see it. And additionally, if somebody wanted to print out the version of the trifold brochure, there is an attachment to the PDF at the bottom of the web page. And I also found that it's necessary to accurately measure environmental risk and match it with the perceived risk. So it's important that tank facility owners know that there is a huge safety risk if there is not properly kept tanks, and matching that with the actual potential of groundwater contamination and how it could harm the community can be more effective in influencing them to get into compliance. We also directly targeted tribal communities with our outreach to be as effective as we could in communicating that environmental risk and mitigating the challenge of environmental injustice and lack of access to information. And so we also couldn't measure the outcome that this outreach had on compliance rates because it was just recently done, and we would have to see how having this information through this outreach would affect compliance rates after future inspections. And so the broader implications of this, I think the next steps of this topic could be to use similar outreach practices to communicate environmental risk to other marginalized communities. And if this is effective, having greater compliance rates means a lower risk of these tanks leaking. And a lower risk of these tanks leaking means there's a lower risk of groundwater contamination, and as such, overall safer communities. And if this proves to be successful, other regions of the EPA could adopt this strategy and use it for themselves and hopefully get compliance rates up in other regions as well. So that's about it for my presentation. Thank you all for watching, and special thanks to the entire underground storage tank team at the EPA Region 10, including Serena, Lisa, and Charlotte, and also to my faculty advisor, Lubna, for all the great feedback on my project. So yeah, thank you all for watching.